The blood-soaked sun hung heavy over the Arizona territory as Theresa Ryland stumbled down the dusty main street of Castle Dome in 1875, her split lip throbbing with each labored breath. The copper mines had brought prosperity to some in this rugged corner of the territory, but for a woman with opinions, they had brought only pain. She clutched her tattered journal to her chest like a shield, though it had failed to protect her from her father's fists. "A woman's place is to listen, not to speak," he had roared, his knuckles connecting with her cheek as punishment for suggesting the miners deserved better pay at the town meeting. "Your foolish ideas bring shame on this family." At 22, Theresa had long suffered her father's temper, but tonight something had broken inside her, not her spirit, but her tolerance. She couldn't return home, not this time. Blood trickled from her swollen lip as she pressed forward toward the livery stable, where she hoped to find shelter among the horses until she could devise a plan. The creak of the stable door seemed to echo like thunder in the growing darkness. Theresa slipped inside, the familiar smell of hay and leather offering small comfort. She slumped against the wall, exhaustion claiming her as she listened to the gentle snorting of the horses. "Miss, are you all right?" The deep voice startled her from her half-sleep. She scrambled backward, raising her arms defensively. "I'm not here to hurt you." The man stepped from the shadows, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim lantern light. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine," Theresa replied, the words coming out thick through her swollen lip. "Just needed a moment's rest." The stranger moved closer, and she could now make out his features' strong jawline, weathered skin bronzed by the sun, and eyes the color of the desert sky at dusk. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn leather chaps, dusty boots, and a Stetson pushed back on his head. "That's more than a moment's rest you need," he said, kneeling before her. He produced a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. "Name's Ross Zackery. I work cattle for the Double R outside of town." Theresa hesitated before accepting the cloth. "Theresa Ryland. Who did this to you, Miss Ryland?" His voice remained even, but she noticed his free hand had tightened into a fist. "It doesn't matter." She dabbed at her lip, wincing at the pain. "He won't listen anyway." "Your husband?" Ross asked, his expression darkening. "My father," she corrected, feeling both shame and defiance. "I spoke at the town meeting today. Said the miners deserved fair treatment after the cave-in last month. He didn't appreciate my contribution." Ross's expression softened, replaced by something Theresa couldn't quite place. "You got beaten for speaking your mind," she nodded, expecting the usual lecture about a woman's proper place. Instead, Ross gently touched her shoulder, his voice low and earnest. "With me, your words will be treasured, Miss Ryland, not silenced." Something fluttered in Theresa's chest, hope, perhaps, or simply surprise at his unexpected response. But she had learned the hard way that men's promises were like dust in the wind. "Kind words, Mr. Zackery, but they don't change my situation." "Maybe not," he agreed, standing and offering her his hand. "But I can offer you safe passage to the Double R. Mrs. Henderson, the cook, could use help in the kitchen, and the bunkhouse has a small room off the back where you'd have privacy. It's not much, but it's far from your father's fists." Theresa stared at his outstretched hand. Leaving Castle Dome meant abandoning her mother and younger sister to her father's mercy. But staying meant certain abuse, perhaps worse than before after her public defiance. "I can't just leave," she whispered. "Sometimes leaving is the only way to find your voice again," Ross said. "The offer stands. I'll be heading out at first light." Theresa clutched her journal tighter. Inside were her thoughts, her poetry, her dreams, all the things she'd been told were worthless coming from a woman's mind. How many times had her father threatened to burn it? How many times had she hidden it beneath the loose floorboard in her room? "I'll think about it," she finally said. Ross nodded, retrieving a blanket from a nearby shelf. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch." "You don't need to, I know," he interrupted gently, "but I will anyway." As the night deepened around Castle Dome, Theresa tried to sleep, but her mind raced with possibilities. The Double R Ranch was a good 15 miles outside town, far enough that her father wouldn't easily find her, but not so far that she couldn't return if needed. If she could earn money of her own, perhaps she could eventually send for her mother and sister. Morning came too quickly, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the stable's wooden slats. Theresa opened her eyes to find Ross already awake, saddling 2 horses. "I need to go home first," she said, her decision made during the long night. "There are things I need to collect." Ross looked at her appraisingly. "Your father will be there." "Not at this hour, he'll be at the mine office." She stood, brushing hay from her skirt. "I won't be long." "I'll come with you." "That isn't necessary." "It is," Ross insisted. "I'll wait outside, but I won't let you go alone." The streets of Castle Dome were beginning to stir as they rode toward the residential area where the mine manager's house stood proud among the modest dwellings. Theresa's home was a 2-story clapboard structure with a wraparound porch, respectable on the outside, a prison within. "Wait here," she told Ross, dismounting at the back gate. Inside, the house was quiet. Theresa moved swiftly to her room, gathering a few dresses, her mother's locket, and the small amount of money she'd saved from selling eggs at the mercantile. Most importantly, she collected her other journals from beneath the floorboard, 5 years of thoughts that her father had never discovered. She was halfway down the stairs when her mother appeared from the kitchen, eyes widening at the sight of Theresa's bruised face. "My child," Martha Ryland whispered, rushing forward. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving, Mother," Theresa said, her resolve strengthening at the sight of her mother's perpetual fear. "Come with me. Bring Ellen. We can start over." Martha shook her head, her eyes darting nervously toward the front door as if expecting her husband to burst through it at any moment. "He would find us, he always does." "Not this time." Theresa took her mother's hands. "I've found somewhere safe. The Double R Ranch needs kitchen help." "A ranch?" Her mother's voice rose an octave. "Theresa, you can't live among cowboys. Your reputation, my reputation." Theresa interrupted, pulling back. "Look at what he did to me for speaking at a town meeting. What will he do next time? And what about Ellen when she gets older? Do you want her living in fear too?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. "He promises to change." "After every time he promises, and he never does." Theresa softened her tone, knowing her mother's fear ran bone deep. "I have to go, Mother, but I'll send for you when I can. I promise." A floorboard creaked upstairs and both women froze. Ellen, Theresa's 14-year-old sister, appeared at the top of the stairs, her nightgown flowing around her slender frame. "Tess," she asked sleepily, "where are you going?" Theresa climbed back up several steps, pulling her sister into a tight hug. "I have to go away for a while, but I'll come back for you. Be strong, be smart, and hide your thoughts where he can't find them." She pressed a small journal into Ellen's hands. "Write everything down, but keep it secret." Ellen's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Father did this to your face." It wasn't a question, but Theresa nodded anyway. "I love you, remember that." With a final embrace for both her mother and sister, Theresa slipped out the back door, her heart hammering in her chest. Ross was waiting exactly where she'd left him, his expression relieved when she appeared. "Ready?" he asked simply. "As I'll ever be," she replied, mounting the horse he'd provided. "Let's go before my father returns." They rode out of Castle Dome as the town came fully awake, taking the northern trail that would lead them into the desert foothills where the Double R sprawled across 5,000 acres of Arizona territory. Theresa didn't look back, couldn't bear to see the town that had confined her for so long. "You're doing the right thing," Ross said after they'd ridden in silence for several miles. "Some chains can't be broken unless you leave them behind first." Theresa studied his profile against the morning light. "You sound like you know something about chains, Mr. Zackery." A shadow crossed his face. Everyone has their own set to break. The Double R Ranch came into view by midday, a collection of sturdy buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. Cattle dotted the surrounding hillsides, and horses grazed in a corral near the main house. It was larger than Theresa had expected, suggesting the owner had substantial means. "Mr. Roberts runs one of the biggest cattle operations in the territory," Ross explained as they approached. "He's a fair man, if a bit rough around the edges." "And will he approve of you bringing a strange woman to his ranch?" Theresa asked, suddenly unsure of her decision. "Mrs. Henderson has been asking for kitchen help for months, and Mr. Roberts respects my judgment." Ross offered a reassuring smile. "Besides, once he tastes your cooking, he'll forget all about how you got here." Theresa gave him a wry look. "You haven't tasted my cooking, Mr. Zackery. Then we'll both be surprised." They were met at the ranch house by a stout woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "Mrs. Henderson took one look at Theresa's bruised face and ushered her inside without a word, leaving Ross to explain the situation to the ranch owner. "Get yourself cleaned up," the cook said, pointing to a small washroom off the kitchen. "Then we'll see about that face of yours. I've got a salve that'll help with the swelling." The simple kindness nearly undid Theresa's composure. She managed a thank you before retreating to splash cool water on her face, wincing as it touched her cuts. When she emerged, Mrs. Henderson had laid out a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold beef. "Eat," the older woman commanded. "Then we'll talk." Theresa hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her. She ate quickly, embarrassed by her appetite but unable to slow down. "Ross says your father did that to you," Mrs. Henderson said as Theresa finished the last of the bread. "For speaking at a town meeting." Theresa nodded, bracing for judgment or dismissal. "Good for you," the cook said instead, surprising her. "About the speaking part, not the beating. This territory needs more women willing to open their mouths about something besides recipes and gossip." Before Theresa could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and a tall man with a silver-streaked beard entered, followed by Ross. This had to be Augustus Roberts, the ranch owner. "Miss Ryland," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Ross tells me you're looking for work." "Yes, sir," Theresa answered, sitting up straighter despite her aching body. "I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly." Roberts studied her for a long moment. "Can you read and write?" "Very well, sir. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married." A hint of approval crossed his weathered face. "Good. Mrs. Henderson needs help in the kitchen, but I could also use someone to help with the ledgers and correspondence. My eyes aren't what they used to be." Hope surged through Theresa. "I would be happy to help with both, Mr. Roberts. The pay is $15 a month plus room and board," he continued. "Church is every Sunday in the ranch hall, no exceptions. No entertaining men in your quarters. And if your father comes looking for you, you tell me or Ross immediately." "Understood." "Yes, sir, thank you." Roberts nodded, apparently satisfied. "Mrs. Henderson will show you your quarters. You start work tomorrow." After he left, Theresa turned to Ross, who had remained silent during the exchange. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "There's nothing to repay," he replied. "Just use that voice of yours. It deserves to be heard." Over the next weeks, Theresa settled into life at the Double R. Her room was small but clean, with a real bed and a lock on the door, a luxury she'd never had before. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a patient teacher in the kitchen, and Mr. Roberts seemed pleased with her bookkeeping skills. Ross kept his distance, respecting the ranch's rules about propriety, but Theresa often caught him watching her from across the dining hall. Something warm and unfamiliar stirred inside her whenever their eyes met, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had come here to find freedom, not to trade one man's control for another's, no matter how kind his eyes might be. A month into her stay, Theresa was kneading bread dough in the kitchen when Mrs. Henderson handed her a letter. "Came with the supply wagon from town," the cook explained. The handwriting on the envelope made Theresa's heart race Ellen's careful script. She wiped her hands and tore it open, scanning the contents quickly. "Father is furious. He went to the Double R 2 days after you left, but came back empty-handed. Says Mr. Roberts threatened him with a shotgun. Mother cries at night but seems stronger somehow. I've been writing in the journal you gave me. Father took me out of school, says I don't need education to be a wife. Please don't come back yet. He's still looking for you." Theresa's hands trembled as she folded the letter. She hadn't known about her father's visit, Mr. Roberts, and Ross must have kept it from her to spare her worry. "Bad news?" Mrs. Henderson asked, eyeing her with concern. "My father came here looking for me," Theresa admitted. "Mr. Roberts turned him away. With a shotgun, yes." The cook nodded matter-of-factly. "We all heard the commotion. That man has no right to call himself a father, treating you the way he did." Theresa blinked back tears. "My sister says he's still looking for me." "Let him look," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "You're one of us now. And the Double R takes care of its own." The words gave Theresa unexpected comfort. For the first time in her life, she felt protected rather than controlled, valued rather than tolerated. That evening, as she helped serve dinner to the ranch hands, Ross approached her, his expression serious. "I should have told you about your father's visit," he said quietly. "I didn't want to frighten you." "Mr. Roberts handled it?" Theresa asked, grateful for the man's interference. "We both did," Ross admitted. "I may have suggested that if he ever touched you again, he'd answer to me personally." Theresa stared at him, surprised by the protective edge in his voice. "That was a risk. He's an important man in Castle Dome." "And you're an important woman here," Ross replied simply. "Besides, no decent man raises his hand to his daughter, no matter how important he thinks he is." Something shifted in Theresa's chest, a wall beginning to crumble. "Thank you for standing up for me." "I meant what I said that night in the stable," he told her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your words, your thoughts, they're treasures, not burdens. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Over the following months, Theresa found herself blooming at the Double R. Her cooking improved under Mrs. Henderson's tutelage, and Mr. Roberts increasingly relied on her for correspondence and bookkeeping. The bruises on her face healed, but the memory of her father's rage remained, a shadow that occasionally darkened her dreams. More letters came from Ellen, smuggled out with the help of a sympathetic neighbor. Her sister reported that their mother had begun standing up to their father in small ways, refusing to serve his dinner when he came home drunk, speaking up when he criticized Ellen's housekeeping. It wasn't freedom, but it was progress. Theresa sent money when she could, along with notes encouraging both her mother and sister to hold onto their dignity. She promised that someday they would be together again, somewhere their father couldn't reach them. As spring turned to summer in 1876, Theresa found herself spending more time with Ross. Their conversations began simply enough discussions about books they had read, observations about the ranch, memories of places they had seen. But gradually, they evolved into deeper exchanges about hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments. I never wanted to be a cowboy, Ross confessed one evening as they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Mr. Roberts had gone to Phoenix on business, and Mrs. Henderson had retreated to her room with a headache, leaving them alone but in full view of anyone who might pass by, perfectly proper but private enough for conversation. "What did you want to be?" Theresa asked, genuinely curious. "A doctor." He smiled at her surprised expression. "My father was a physician in Missouri. I studied with him from the time I was 12 until he died when I was 20. Then the war came." "You fought in the Civil War," Ross nodded, his eyes distant. "Confederate side." "Not by choice. Missouri was divided and our town went with the South. After Gettysburg, I couldn't stomach any more death, deserted and headed west." "That's why you're so far from home," Theresa realized. "You're hiding too." "I was," he corrected. "The war's been over for more than 10 years now. I could go back if I wanted to, but there's nothing left for me there. My mother remarried and moved to California. Our house was burned during the fighting." "I'm sorry," Theresa said softly. "Don't be." Ross turned to look at her, his expression earnest. "If things had been different, I wouldn't be here now. And despite everything, I'm glad I am." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Theresa felt her cheeks warm and looked away, uncertain how to respond to the sentiment behind his words. "What about you?" Ross asked, sensing her discomfort and changing course. "What did little Theresa Ryland dream of becoming?" She laughed softly. "You'll think it's foolish. Try me." "A writer," she admitted. "I've kept journals since I was 12. Poetry, stories, essays about things I've observed. My father would have burned them all if he'd found them." "Have you ever tried to publish anything?" Ross seemed genuinely interested, not dismissive as she had feared. "Where?" "The Castle Dome newspaper prints mining reports and advertisements, not women's scribblings. There are newspapers in Tucson, Phoenix, even San Francisco that might be interested." He gestured toward the main house. "Roberts subscribes to half a dozen publications. You could send something out, see what happens." The idea sent a thrill of both excitement and terror through Theresa. "No one has ever read my writing except me." "I would," Ross offered quietly, "if you wanted a reader." The simple offer touched Theresa deeply. For years, her words had been secret companions, hidden away from judgment and ridicule. The thought of sharing them voluntarily, with someone who might actually value them, was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'll think about it," she promised. A week later, Theresa nervously handed Ross a small leather-bound journal containing some of her poetry and short essays. "You don't have to read all of it," she told him, already regretting her decision. "And please be honest if it's terrible." "I'll read every word," he assured her, treating the book with reverence. "And I'll be honest, but I doubt very much it's terrible." 3 days passed before Ross returned the journal. Theresa had barely slept, imagining his polite but disappointed reaction to her amateur scribblings. When he finally approached her in the garden where she was gathering vegetables for supper, his expression was unreadable. "Well?" she prompted when he didn't immediately speak. "How bad was it?" "It wasn't bad at all," he said slowly. "Theresa, you have a gift. The way you describe the desert, the people of Castle Dome, even your father, it's powerful. Raw in places, yes, but genuine. People should read your words." Hope flared in her chest. "You're not just saying that to be kind." "I promised honesty," he reminded her. "There's a poem on page 17 about the sunset over the mountains that made me see colors I've never noticed before. And your essay about the miners' wives, the quiet strength they show while their men are underground each day, it moved me deeply." Tears pricked at Theresa's eyes. For so long, she had been told her thoughts were worthless. her observations unnecessary. To have someone not just tolerate her voice but celebrate it was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more past the lump in her throat. Ross stepped closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I meant what I said the night we met. Your words are treasures, Theresa. The world deserves to hear them, but even if no one else ever does, I'm honored that you shared them with me." Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of trust, a recognition of shared understanding. Theresa realized with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with Ross Zackery, not because he had rescued her, but because he truly saw her in a way no one ever had before. The realization should have frightened her. After watching her mother's spirit slowly crushed under her father's dominance, Theresa had vowed never to give a man power over her heart, but Ross didn't seem interested in power. From the beginning, he had offered freedom, not constraint, encouragement, not control. "Would you help me?" she asked impulsively. "To send something to a newspaper, I mean. I wouldn't know where to start." Ross's face lit up with a smile that made her heart flutter. "It would be my pleasure." Together, they selected 2 of her essays and a poem to send to the Arizona Citizen in Tucson. Ross helped her craft a polite cover letter, explaining that she was a young woman writing from a cattle ranch in the territory. They mailed the package with the next supply wagon, and the waiting began. Weeks passed with no response. Theresa tried not to be disappointed, telling herself it had been a foolish hope anyway. She threw herself into her work at the ranch, which had grown busier as cattle driving season approached. The Double R would be sending 3,000 head to market in Tucson, and preparations consumed everyone's time. One evening in late August, Mr. Roberts summoned Theresa to his study, his expression uncharacteristically excited. "This came for you," he said, handing her an envelope bearing the Arizona Citizen's letterhead. "Thought you might want to open it privately." Theresa's hands trembled as she accepted the letter. "Thank you, sir." "Whatever it says," Roberts added gruffly, "you've got talent, girl. Ross showed me one of your pieces about ranch life. Captured it better than I could myself, and I've lived it for 30 years. Touched by the unexpected praise, Theresa retreated to the porch, where the fading light would still allow her to read. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "Dear Miss Ryland, I must confess that when your submission arrived, I placed it in the stack of correspondence that receives only cursory attention. However, upon reading your essay, Copper Dreams, The Women Behind Castle Dome's Mining Men, I found myself compelled to reconsider. Your perspective is fresh, your observations keen, and your prose engaging. I would be pleased to publish this essay in our September edition, along with your poem, Desert Twilight. Enclosed, please find a check for $5 as payment. Should you have additional pieces, I encourage you to submit them for consideration. Respectfully, John Wasson, editor, Arizona Citizen. Theresa stared at the letter in disbelief, then at the small check that had fluttered into her lap. Published. She was going to be published, and paid for her words. The validation was almost too much to comprehend. She was still sitting in shocked silence when Ross found her on the porch, his expression concerned until he saw the letter in her hands. "News from Tucson?" he asked, hardly daring to hope. Theresa looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "They're publishing my essay and poem. And they're paying me $5. Theresa!" Ross's face broke into a wide grin. "That's wonderful. I knew they would see what I saw." Without thinking, she stood and threw her arms around him in an impulsive embrace. Ross froze for a moment, then carefully returned the hug, his arms strong but gentle around her. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, pulling back slightly to look up at him. "You made me believe it was possible." "No," he corrected her softly. "The talent was always yours. I just held the lantern so you could see it too." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Theresa thought he might kiss her. Instead, Ross respectfully stepped back, though the warmth in his gaze remained. "This calls for a celebration," he declared. "I'll ask Mrs. Henderson to make her special apple pie for dessert tonight." As they walked back to the main house together, Theresa felt a sense of possibility expanding before her. For the first time, she could imagine a future where her voice mattered, where her words reached beyond the confines of her private journals. And increasingly, she couldn't imagine that future without Ross in it. The publication of Theresa's essay in the Arizona Citizen created ripples that reached all the way back to Castle Dome. By October, she had received 3 more letters from the newspaper, each requesting additional submissions. Mr. Roberts, impressed by her success, gave her a small raise and reduced her kitchen duties so she could devote more time to writing. Then came the letter from Ellen that changed everything. "Father saw your piece in the newspaper." He was drinking at the saloon when someone read it aloud, recognizing the description of Castle Dome. "He came home in a rage like I've never seen. Tess, he hurt Mother badly. She couldn't get out of bed for 2 days. We need to leave, but we have nowhere to go. Please help us if you can." Theresa's hands shook as she showed the letter to Ross. They had grown closer over the past months, their feelings for each other evident though still largely unspoken due to the ranch's strict policies about courtship. "I have to bring them here," Theresa said, her voice tight with worry. "Ellen is only 15. She can't protect herself or Mother from him." Ross nodded grimly. "I'll speak to Mr. Roberts, then I'll go to Castle Dome myself to get them." "Not alone," Theresa insisted. "I'm coming with you. They won't leave unless they see me." "It's too dangerous," Ross argued. "Your father will be watching for you. Then we'll need to be careful." Theresa met his concerned gaze with determination. "This isn't negotiable, Ross. They're my family." After much discussion, a plan was formed. Mr. Roberts agreed to provide a wagon and an escort of 3 ranch hands, including Ross. Theresa would remain hidden until they reached Castle Dome, where they would wait until nightfall to approach the Ryland home. If all went well, they would have Ellen and Martha safely away before Garrett Ryland realized what was happening. The journey to Castle Dome was tense, with Theresa concealed beneath canvas in the back of the wagon whenever they passed other travelers. They arrived at dusk and waited at the edge of town for full darkness before proceeding. "Stay in the wagon until I signal," Ross told Theresa, his expression serious. "If anything goes wrong, the men will get you back to the ranch immediately." "Be careful," she whispered, touching his hand briefly. "My father is dangerous when he's angry." "So am I," Ross replied grimly, "but I won't start trouble if I can help it." Ross and one of the ranch hands, a quiet Texan named Jim, approached the Ryland house from the back, while the other 2 men remained with the wagon and Theresa. The plan was simple. Ross would knock at the back door, speak with Martha or Ellen if they answered, and arrange for them to slip out quietly with their belongings. What they hadn't anticipated was Garrett Ryland being home and very much awake at the late hour. The shouting reached Theresa in the wagon, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Unable to stay hidden any longer, she leaped from the wagon, ignoring the protests of the ranch hands, and ran toward her childhood home. She arrived to find Ross squared off against her father on the back porch, Jim standing protectively in front of Martha and Ellen, who clutched small bundles of belongings. "You turned my daughter against me," Garrett was saying, his words slurred with drink but his massive frame still imposing as he jabbed a finger at Ross. Filled her head with ideas about writing and independence. She was an obedient girl before you corrupted her. She was terrified before, Ross corrected, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from him. And she's always had ideas of her own. You just never bothered to listen. Theresa belongs at home, under my roof, not running around with cowboys and publishing trash that makes me a laughingstock in my own town. Theresa belongs wherever she chooses to be, Ross replied. And right now, she's chosen to help her mother and sister get away from your fists. Garrett lunged forward, swinging wildly at Ross, who sidestepped the clumsy attack. Seeing the situation deteriorating, Theresa rushed forward. "Father, stop," she called out, drawing everyone's attention. "This is my decision, not his. I'm taking Mother and Ellen somewhere safe." Garrett's face contorted with rage at the sight of his eldest daughter. "You ungrateful little—" He moved toward her with raised hand. Ross stepped between them, his voice deadly quiet. "Touch her, and it will be the last thing you ever do." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Martha Ryland stepped forward, her normally timid demeanor replaced by quiet resolve. "It's over, Garrett," she said, her voice stronger than Theresa had heard in years. "I've endured your cruelty for 20 years, but I won't let you destroy our daughters too." "You're my wife," Garrett snarled. "You have no right, I have every right to protect my children," Martha interrupted. "Something you've never understood." The unexpected defiance seemed to deflate Garrett temporarily. Theresa seized the moment to usher her mother and sister toward the wagon while Ross and Jim kept her father at bay. "This isn't over," Garrett shouted as they retreated. "I'll find you. You belong to me." "No, father," Theresa called back, a lifetime of fear finally crystallizing into righteous anger. "We never belonged to you. We belonged with you, and you threw that away with your first raised hand." The return journey to the Double R was tense but uneventful. Martha sat silently, occasionally wiping away tears while Ellen slept fitfully against her shoulder, exhausted by fear and relief. Theresa watched the dark landscape pass, half expecting to see her father in pursuit, despite the precautions they'd taken to conceal their trail. "He won't find you," Ross assured her, riding alongside the wagon, "and if he tries, he'll have to get through me first." Theresa reached out to squeeze his hand gratefully. "Thank you, for everything." "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat," he replied simply, "Mrs." Henderson had prepared rooms for Martha and Ellen, and the ranch hands had been instructed to keep a watchful eye on the approaches to the Double R. Mr. Roberts himself assured the Ryland women that they were under his protection now. "No man worth the name raises his hand to a woman," the old rancher declared gruffly. "You're safe here as long as you need to be." In the days that followed, Theresa watched her mother and sister slowly begin to relax, the constant tension of fear gradually easing from their shoulders. Martha's skills as a former teacher proved valuable to the ranch, as she began tutoring the children of some of the married ranch hands. Ellen, bright and curious, flourished in the open atmosphere of the ranch, trailing after Mrs. Henderson and learning about herbs and cooking with enthusiastic interest. As for Theresa, her writing continued to find an audience. The Arizona Citizen had begun featuring her work regularly, and a newspaper in Phoenix had reprinted one of her essays about territorial life. Mr. Wasson, the Tucson editor, had written suggesting she consider collecting her pieces into a book, an idea that both terrified and exhilarated her. Through it all, Ross remained her most steadfast supporter, reading drafts of her work, offering thoughtful feedback, and celebrating each new publication as if it were his own achievement. Their feelings for each other had deepened into something neither could deny, though ranch propriety still kept their interactions largely public and formal. One evening in early December, as winter settled gently over the Arizona territory, Ross asked Theresa to walk with him after supper. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead as they strolled toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings. "I've been thinking," Ross began, his breath visible in the chilly air, "about the future." Theresa's heart quickened. "Oh, I've saved most of my wages these past 5 years," he continued. "Nearly $2,000, enough to buy a small spread of my own maybe 50 miles west of here. Good water, decent grazing land. You're leaving the double R." Theresa couldn't hide her dismay. Ross turned to face her, taking her gloved hands in his. "That depends entirely on you, Theresa Ryland." "On me," she echoed, hardly daring to hope what his words might mean. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since that night in the stable when you spoke about the miners with such passion despite your bruised face. You're the bravest, most talented woman I've ever known, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Tears pricked at Theresa's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Ross, I'm not asking you to give up your writing or your independence," he hurried to add. "In fact, I don't want you to change a single thing about yourself. I just want to build a life with you where your voice will always be heard, your words always treasured." "Are you proposing?" Theresa asked, wanting absolute clarity despite the emotion of the moment. Ross smiled, dropping to one knee in the desert soil. "Theresa Ryland, will you marry me? Not to be my possession, but my partner. Not to follow my lead, but to walk beside me." The question, asked with such respect for her personhood, was everything Theresa could have wished for. After witnessing her mother's subjugation for so many years, she had feared marriage as a kind of imprisonment. But Ross was offering something different, a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect and admiration. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I will marry you, Ross Zackery." He rose to his feet, his face alight with joy, and drew her carefully into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle but full of promise, the beginning of a story they would write together. The wedding took place at the Double R on Christmas Day, 1876, a simple ceremony attended by the ranch hands and neighboring families. Martha Ryland, standing taller than she had in years, gave her daughter away. Ellen served as maid of honor, her young face radiant with happiness for her sister. Mr. Roberts, acting as both host and unofficial father figure, provided a feast that the ranch would remember for years to come. Theresa wore a dress of pale blue, not the traditional white, with wildflowers in her hair. Ross, in a new suit ordered from Tucson, couldn't take his eyes off her as they exchanged vows promising not just love and fidelity, but respect and encouragement. "I promise to treasure your words and your spirit," Ross added to the traditional vows, his voice carrying clearly across the ranch hall. "To stand beside you, not above you, for all the days of our lives." Theresa, moved by his personalized promise, offered one of her own. "I promise to trust in your strength without fearing it, to share my thoughts without reservation, and to build with you a home where all voices are valued." As they began their married life on the small ranch Ross had purchased, Theresa continued to write. Her collected essays, published under the title Copper Dust and Cattle Tracks, a woman's voice from the Arizona territory, gained attention not just in the Southwest, but in Eastern literary circles as well. Letters arrived from women across the country who had found courage in her words, who recognized in her descriptions of frontier life their own struggles and triumphs. Ross built her a small study with windows facing the mountains, where she could write without interruption when inspiration struck. In the spring of 1878, their first child was born, a son they named William, after Ross's father. Theresa feared motherhood might silence her literary voice, but instead it gave her new subjects to explore. Her essays about raising a child on the frontier, balancing maternal duties with intellectual pursuits, resonated particularly with female readers. 2 years later, their daughter Martha Ellen arrived, named for both grandmothers. By then, the Zackery Ranch had prospered, expanding to include better grazing lands and a small apple orchard that Theresa had insisted upon, remembering the trees of her Missouri childhood. Martha Ryland lived with them, helping with the children and finding late-life contentment in watching her grandchildren grow up without fear. Ellen, now 20, had developed into a skilled herbalist under Mrs. Henderson's tutelage and had opened a small apothecary in Tucson, where her gentle manner and effective remedies were gaining her a loyal clientele. As for Garrett Ryland, he had indeed tried to reclaim his family once, appearing at the Double R 6 months after their escape. The confrontation ended with him looking down the barrels of not just Ross's rifle, but those of every ranch hand loyal to the woman whose words had touched their rough hearts. Faced with such unified opposition, he had retreated, and reports from Castle Dome indicated he had eventually sold his interests in the mine and moved east, his reputation diminished by his public abandonment. On a warm evening in the summer of 1882, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching their children play in the yard, Theresa took Ross's hand. "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could read the answer in his contented expression. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. "And you? Do you ever regret choosing this life with me?" Theresa looked out over their home, the thriving ranch, the children's laughter, the study where her third book was taking shape, the family they had built together. "Not for a single moment," she said truthfully. "You gave me the greatest gift anyone could give, the freedom to use my voice without fear. Everything else, our home, our children, our love, has grown from that first seed of respect." Ross smiled, remembering their first meeting in the stable of Castle Dome, when a brave young woman with a bruised face had inadvertently changed the course of both their lives. "Your words will always be treasured here," he promised again, as he had on that fateful night, "for as long as I live." "And yours in return," Theresa replied, leaning her head against his shoulder as the Arizona sunset painted the sky in the colors she had once thought existed only in her imagination, colors that now filled every aspect of her once monochrome world. In the years that followed, the Zackery Ranch became known not just for its fine cattle, but as a gathering place for writers, artists, and thinkers passing through the territory. Theresa's literary salon, held quarterly, attracted journalists from as far as San Francisco and intellectuals from Eastern universities curious about the articulate, frontier authoress, whose perspectives on Western life had captured the national imagination. Their family expanded to include another son, James, born in 1884, completing their family of 5. All 3 Zackery children grew up surrounded by books, ideas, and the certainty that their thoughts were valued regardless of age or gender. By the time Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, Theresa Ryland Zackery had published 6 books and countless articles, becoming one of the territory's most respected literary voices. She had written eloquently about women's suffrage, education reform, and the changing landscape of the West, as railroads and telegraph lines connected once isolated communities. Ross, her partner in all things, had expanded their ranch while supporting her career without reservation. when the newly formed Arizona State University invited Theresa to lecture on Western literature in 1915, it was Ross who insisted she accept, managing the ranch alone for the 3 months she was away. "Your words have meaning beyond these hills," he told her as he helped pack her trunks. "The world deserves to hear them directly from you." Through nearly 4 decades of marriage, they remained true to their earliest promises. He treasured her voice, and she trusted his strength. Together, they created not just a successful ranch and a loving family, but a legacy of respect that rippled outward through their children and the many lives they touched. Their story became part of Arizona's cultural fabric, the educated cowboy and the writer who found each other in a stable on a violent night in Castle Dome, who built a life based not on dominance and submission, but on mutual admiration and support. And in their twilight years, as they sat together watching desert sunsets, they often reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them together, how violence had ultimately led to peace, how silencing had given way to celebration, and how love, when rooted in genuine respect, could grow strong enough to change not just 2 lives but countless others. "We've been fortunate," Theresa would say, her hand in his, both of them now weathered by time and the harsh desert elements. "We've been deliberate," Ross would correct gently. "We chose a different way when it would have been easier to follow the old patterns." In that choice to value words over silence, partnership over dominance, growth over control, they had found not just happiness, but something far rarer. A love that expanded rather than confined, that strengthened rather than diminished, that treasured rather than possessed. And in the end, that was their true legacy, not the books or the ranch or even their children, but the example they set of what was possible when a woman's words were not just permitted but treasured, when a man's strength served to protect rather than control, when love became not a cage but the key that unlocked the fullest potential in both.